Well, hi and welcome to another Building Pulse. This will officially be the last one of 2024. We weren't planning on doing this one, but we really felt like it was worth just putting out a bit of information to the industry in response to the latest changes or proposed changes to the H1 and give you a little something to think about over the summer. Submissions close 18th of February. Which means, if you're going to be putting something through either this side of Christmas or as soon as you get back, pretty much, you'll have had to thought about it a little bit over this period. So we thought it would be worthwhile just trying to get this out, getting a little bit of feedback and input from someone who is deeply involved in this space all day, every day. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to bring in Justin Grimshaw from Mammoth Insulation to hear his thoughts and feedback on these changes and what's good and what maybe needs to change and does it go far enough, and let's see what he's got to say. So thanks again for joining us, and excellent. We will catch you in the new year. Welcome, Justin, and thanks for joining us. It's a little bit of an impromptu Building Pulse because we've had this document out at MBIE with some proposed additional changes to the H1 code. And you're who I thought of to come and get a bit of a read on what are these changes, what do they mean for the industry, are they good, are they bad, do they go far enough? And obviously there's parts of it that go beyond sort of Mammoth and insulation where you guys sit, but do you want to give us a bit of a summary of it, and also just kind of some of the key things that you think are really probably helpful about what they've released?
Hi, Tim. Thanks for having me on board. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously super interesting. I think MB and Minister Penk have been tasked with obviously finding out how the changes have gone and where the sticking points are and where the issues are. So it's good to see them actually take that feedback on board and come up with obviously this document where they're trying to address some of those things. We've been doing, I guess, H1 calculations and H1 compliance with various practices and builders for many years now. So with the new changes, we got to see that firsthand, where those sticking points were and what the issues were. So seeing some of them addressed in this document is awesome from our point of view.
What were some of those sticky points that you think? And I assume we're talking in relation to the 2022 changes that slowly rolled into place that are now kind of all there. Are they all there, or are we still in the final rollout?
No, we've been all there for over a year now. So I guess we got to see the full force over the last year. Where those issues, where we always thought there'd be issues with certain places and points, and slowly things have changed. And I mean, you see some of them roll out where things are getting better. And I think costs are coming down in certain areas, but then other ones are definitely issues in dealing with architects and designers. They try and avoid certain things or really don't want to use certain things. You'll see slab edge seems to be avoided like the plague by most builders and architects, So there's a real pushback to try and not use that when trying to get their slabs, up in the R values.
Are they just rejecting it for price, or is it just the complexity of adding it to the project, or you don't really know?
Well, it seems to be both. We try and get a gauge on that. When you're doing an H1 calculation, and if it's a complex design, for example, and you're struggling to get it to comply, you often go back and say, look, guys, you're going to have to, bump up your windows or add slab edge or add a triple layer of insulation or go to 140 wall frames, whatever it might be. And the last thing they'll ever want to do is put slab edge on them. And I asked them that, normally it is, like you say, technical price. They'd rather put under slab underneath a raft slab than they would put slab edge on it from everything we see.
Well, that's interesting. So, in terms of that being a sticky point, is that because the standards were raised, but how we got there, how we demonstrated it, the market just hadn't got used to, or was it because we're still trying to use the schedule method, or what was actually sticky about it?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that in this document that they've revised is allowing, I guess, lower R values to be used when using the calculation method as a minimum. But yes, effectively the R values got raised on slabs, and that was both large buildings and housing, two different standards, but both got raised. And what that meant is to get a slab to comply with a schedule method, which is the most basic form, is you needed to achieve a higher R value, which you either had to add under slab or slab edge, and sometimes both. So your typical raft slab used to comply technically, or even a slab on grade would comply with the previous standards of R1.3. It was deemed to comply, but that rule went out the window, and you couldn't assume a slab complied with R1.3 anymore. You had to actually measure every slab for its performance. So a couple of changes there, and that meant we were adding under slabs or slab edge, unless you had a really, really good area to perimeter ratio on a real large slab. But even then, it was quite hard. Like we're finding in the commercial large building realm, is a lot of them are struggling to hit the R values in that space, and they're much higher than what residential is. And
when we're talking commercial large building, are you talking large scale residential, or are you talking like offices and warehouses?
Yeah, offices, warehouses. So apartment buildings and the likes fall under the housing standards still. It's for large buildings over 300 square meters in footprint, and they're changing that a little bit in here with their wording on how you determine what falls into the large building bracket and what falls into the housing bracket. But effectively, anything that is housing is in its own what's called H1 AS1 or H1 VM1. But the large buildings have a real issue because a lot of them are supporting really large structures above them, right? Whatever it may be, and there's a real reluctance to add any under slab in those slabs, and the slabs have gone up, really high. When I talked with MB, they sort of mentioned, I said, well, how are we supposed to achieve these RVs? And they sort of mentioned, well, you could put a false floor on top of the slab. And I thought, well, effectively, you're building two floors at that point, right? Which just seems unreasonable.
It's done in really cold climates, right? But it's expensive to do, and also particularly if you're thinking industrial, the loads that need to go into those. It's not just putting a little 50 mil slab. Like this thing has to take fork hoist and attach racking to, and all of that. It's
and when you look at large buildings and getting H1 compliance, I guess, is often you'll have, if you take a mechanical workshop, for example, you will have what's classed as an industrial part of it, where the vehicles are coming in and out. That's not a conditioned space. The garage doors are going to be up all day, or a car showroom, for example. Then you've got the office space, right, in that building. Now, the office space would be deemed commercial, and that would have to comply with H1 AS2. And so when you look at that whole slab, for example, if you need to get a high number of performance in that slab, are you going to break away? Normally, you'd be pouring it as one slab, right? But are you going to break away an 80 square meter office building in a 500 square meter footprint? You know what I mean? And are you going to put a huge amount of under slab in that 80 square meter office space and then nothing in the rest of the building? You're going to have to pour it as almost two separate slabs, So there's intricacies like that sort of come in for commercial and trying to achieve those very high R values. And I guess the argument is commercial buildings or large buildings have a better area to perimeter footprint, which does give you a slightly better slab performance. Yes, it does, but still hitting those numbers, it doesn't offset it that much to be able to hit the numbers that they had put in there, So that's definitely a huge sticking point for us is those slabs. I see they're addressing that in this document, and they're allowing, when doing the calculation method, they're allowing you to have, I think it is no reference R value, so you can go down as low as you want, but you will have to offset that somewhere else, in your walls, windows, or roof. But at least that's a good thing. You'll find a lot more slabs probably won't be insulating underneath, and you'll just be offsetting somewhere else.
That allows the market to determine best outcome for the site, for the job, right?
Yep.
So maybe give us a quick snapshot then, for those of us who we're not doing the stuff every day, between the schedule method, the modeling method, or is it calculation method is the third option?
Yes. Yep. So
how do those work? What's the difference?
So the schedule method is just a basic tick box exercise. So if you're talking housing here, not large buildings, but if you have under 30% glazing to wall ratio, you are allowed to use the schedule method if you would like. And all you're doing is ticking the box of, yes, I have 6.6 in my ceiling, depending what zone you're in, obviously, of course, but 6.6 is across all 6 climate zones in New Zealand currently. Yes, I have 6.6 construction R value. That is, remember, not product R value. So you've got to work it out with the linings, the roof cladding, the insulation, everything, and there's tools that work that out for you.
We
So
never used to have to do all of that, did we?
we always had to do it. It was just a lot easier to get those numbers.
Right.
So it's pretty much a tick box exercise, and you get those construction RVs out. So if you're talking, let's say climate zone 1, currently you'd have to achieve 6.6 in the ceiling, 2.0 in the walls, 0.46 in your windows, and then depending if you're doing a slab or a timber subfloor, those actually vary, and you'd have to hit that R value there. Then what happens is you can do a calculation method or a modeling method if you would prefer to anyway. You don't have to use the schedule method, but being under 30% glazing allows you to use the schedule method. Then from there, you go into the calculation method, which sits in the 30 to 40% bracket. So if you go over 30% glazing, but you're under 40, you can use the calculation method. And that is, I think, what they call a weighted average tool. So that gives you some flexible design, I guess, where you can be lower in your walls or your floor or your roof or wherever, and you can offset that a little bit somewhere else, right? So it gives you more flexibility to, like you say, you can value engineer a lot more. And the classic example I get is I see a huge amount of plans come through that will have a 2.6 or a 2.5 or a 2.8 in a 90mm framed wall, and then they'll be lower in their ceiling. And a lot of our clients don't realize that if you've got decent roof space, it's far cheaper to go up in your ceiling than it is in your wall with insulation, so we'll often move that around. But that's what the calculation method gives you as well, the ability to move things around based on cost, like we were talking about before. And then you've got the modeling method, which is energy modeling, and it's a lot better. It's a lot more accurate, and it accounts for solar gains, solar losses, and also helps making sure your house doesn't overheat and things like that. So I mean,
So it's
ideally,
actually looking at the house, where it sits and its location, its orientation, and all of those sorts of things, as opposed to going walls, floor, ceilings. It's going, well, that's a south wall, that's a north wall, that sort of thing.
yes, yeah, 100%. So the beauty of that is it spits out, I guess, how many kilowatts of energy per hour per square meter that building is going to use. And so you can make some real informed decisions with a client, about where to spend that money on trying to improve that or trying to get that number down. So that there's a definite benefit to that. And we're definitely doing more of it ourselves personally. But we hear a lot of stories out in the market that, someone's paid $2,000 for a consultant to do the energy model, which probably isn't out of the realms, but that brings in cost in itself. Where I think our industry is lacking a little bit is having a tool that is easy to use. And I guess you can't always have both, right? You can't have your cake and eat it too, which is a little bit frustrating, because to properly energy model, you do need to have all the right inputs and all the information. You're going to have to spend time doing it. But I think there's efficiencies that a lot of these tools probably don't have, where hopefully you could bring them in, and have an industry-wide tool that was fairly easy to use. You didn't have to be a building physicist or someone had spent many years to be able to model buildings, that you could get trained up fairly quickly on, and be able to model. That's where I think, and I might be absolutely dreaming in that space, and that's not, that's the holy grail, and it might not be possible, but having modeled a few buildings and my team model buildings day in, day out, that it's still very slow to do. While the information is very good and accurate and great, it just takes a lot of time, and I believe it's typically going to be specialists or consultants. You're going to spend quite a lot of money to do that. That brings in cost in itself. So I guess, back to your point, those are the three methods of showing compliance with H1. We've seen with the new standards a big shift towards the calculation method, because that's obviously easier than the modeling method, quicker than the modeling method, but it gives you the flexibility in design to be able to move things around. And with this latest consultation document, that's one thing they noted. They're looking at taking away the schedule method, because they know that there's, I guess, a lot of money not being wasted, but a lot of money being spent just on the tick box schedule method exercise, because a lot of the volume builders, and if you take fairly standard houses in New Zealand, they are well below 30% glazing to wall ratio. And you often don't have to use, whether it's double layer, ceiling insulation, under slab, slab edge, even a lot of the ones we do aren't using 0.46 glazing, they're using 0.37 non-thermally broken, low argon filled units. So gives you that flexibility, and you will save a huge amount of money if you've got a low glazing ratio by doing the calculation method. And that's one thing that you see in this document, is that they're talking about removing the schedule method so that it will force everyone to have to use the calculation method. And they believe everyone will upskill on that. And it's not that hard. It might be scary for some people currently, but it's fairly simple once you've done it a few times. It's not like a energy model, thermal model where you've got to be super technical.
Yeah, right. So, and you'd say that's a good thing for the industry?
Yeah, I mean, we've experienced it firsthand, right? Like we used to do quite a few schedules. Then it was almost solely calculation methods, and then now we've got modelling and calculation that we do personally. But the calculation
You guys
method,
do all of that stuff free of charge, don't you? Or is there a slight charge for your modelling?
nah, so that's all free of charge. Our current setup is if a client's going to use Mammoth, we'll do whichever they want, calculation or model for them, free of charge. So that's how we get a lot of our incoming work on that, and we've got guys doing that day in, day out on that front. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a good thing, yeah, because there is a lot of money to be saved by doing the calculation method. I understand it'll be a little bit of pain for people that aren't used to it, but there are free tools out there. There's companies that do it for free, and yeah, the savings are large, especially on standard sort of houses with low glazing ratio. Don't get me wrong, when that glazing ratio goes higher and you're in architecturally designed homes, that obviously then the advantages aren't really there. You'll have to spend money on higher insulation or glazing or slabs or whatever it's going to be.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, all of these things are around improving the performance, and it is focused on energy. We always think about warmth, but it's energy, right? So lower energy housing, but getting there at a cost-effective way. And so having those tools to be able to customize site by site, job by job, makes a big difference, right?
Yes.
So you mentioned earlier construction R values versus the R value on the bag. How's that come into things? Is it still relevant? Is it still getting incorporated into the calculation and modeling methods, or what happens there?
Yeah, so obviously insulation products have their own R value and are tested for that. The building code's built off construction R values, which is the whole element. For a wall, for example, it's lining, framing, insulation, cladding. And there's tools out there that work that out for designers, architects, whoever wants to obviously find that information. There's two main tools. Obviously, brands have their house insulation guide, and Design Navigator have a free online tool as well, which are both obviously brilliant, and that's what most of the industry uses. So, I mean, it's still, obviously, more and more builders, homeowners are getting aware of insulation and the difference between construction RVs and product RVs, but I still feel there's a bit of a lack there, that people think the building code is actually the number you need to hit. The amount of plans that we get come through that just say 6.6 in a ceiling. And you can tell that they're just thinking that's the product, that you put in a 6.6, you're going to hit 6.6, which isn't the case. Depending on what the layup is, you have to work that out in one of those tools to know if it's going to hit 6.6. So so I still think there's a little bit of a gap there, but moral of the story is building codes built off construction RVUs, has been for many years, still is. There's no change on that front.
Yeah. What's fascinating is the more you talk about it, the more I realize the complexity of the topic. That the industry probably, exactly what you were just talking about, in terms of most people just aren't aware, because we're so used to, for decades, having the schedule method, tick box exercise, specify an R value, should go through. And when you get away from that, as soon as you remove that, you delve into the technical complexities of all of these different things that you're talking about. But also, by the sound of things, the calculation method is actually not that hard. But it's interesting. So I think it's critical that companies like yourselves are offering these kind of services for for the architects and things. Otherwise, we are going to see a big jump in cost because it's another thing that it's just more hours someone's charging for to get their head around. And we know when people don't have their head around it, it takes them 2 or 3 times as long to do it, you know. So, but yeah, it's kind of crazy just how technical it can get. But it's good because the end result is that we want something that actually performs, not just ticks boxes, right?
Yeah, that's right, and reduce costs. You know, where there's money being spent where it doesn't need to be at the moment. You know, just because people are doing the schedule method because it's the easiest. Well, what's deemed as the easiest form. Well, it is really because it's a tick box exercise, right? But with just a little bit of work, you'll save thousands of dollars at times, depending on the design. You know, and we see that day in day out where you'll do a calculation method H1 and you'll be able to lean things out, move things around, and you're saving the client thousands of dollars versus what would have been a tick box schedule method.
Mm. So the other thing I read, and I wasn't quite sure if this was in because it was just online, but in the warmer climate zones, a shift towards also having to consider cooling in summer and overheating. Is that true? Is that something that's come in this document? It was already in the previous, or is there any changes?
No, they have mentioned that in this document. You know, there were, I guess, from certain people with the new standards being updated, there was worry of moisture. I guess more into internal moisture in homes and whether that would create issues. And there was worry about overheating. And MBIE addressed them both, I guess, in this consultation document and said that from a study that Brands has done, and I think they referenced the study and it's coming out at some stage, but that there was no extra moisture issues that they found. And when it comes to overheating of homes, that doesn't really come down to insulation, right? Is I guess insulation is going to stop heat coming in, but when heat does come through windows, etc., it's going to be harder for it to escape, with higher levels of insulation. So really, it comes down to solar design and where that's situated. Have you got eaves blocking that sun? All that sort of normal stuff. Is there shading? So I guess
so it's a design response as opposed to a product response.
Yeah. That's none of the methods really take into account solar overheating apart from the energy modeling or modeling method, right? And we saw that firsthand a few weeks back. We had a house design on Waiheke Island, and it was an amazing looking house. And the client actually wanted it energy modeled. So we modeled it and it failed miserably, not because of the levels of insulation. It just had a whole lot of north facing glass with no soffit overhangs, I guess, blocking that summer sun. And it ended up, it was getting way too much solar gain. And you would never see that if you didn't model the place. If we'd run that through the calculation method, it would have passed. And it would have been job done, stamp, off you go, build that house, and because we modeled it, then we went back to the client and said, look, this is failing miserably. What do you want to do about it? And the client didn't really want to add big soffits on or anything like that, but they ended up adding shading to the windows to reduce the amount of solar gain those windows were getting. And they dealt with their window supplier and they came up with a solution that came back to us and we changed the model accordingly, So that's where the modeling method is really beneficial. And I guess a lot of times in New Zealand, we aren't taking solar orientation into account. Yeah, I mean, everyone knows face your house north if you can, all that sort of stuff, but no one really knows how much sun you're gaining until often, it's your first summer in that place and it's cooking, So that's something they've talked about introducing, and hopefully they do introduce something on that front, because I bet you there's a lot of people that build or come and buy a house and then their first summer they realise how much that's hot in summertime and they're having to cool it down, probably by using their heat pump all summer long. So currently only pulled up really in the modelling method, but the other methods don't really address it whatsoever. No, that's right.
Yeah, fascinating. So it'd be interesting to see. It'd be interesting to see if, in some designs, particularly where there's repetitive stuff. If you're a volume builder and you've got, a design you're going to repeat over and over. It'd be nice to think that they would be investing, or not even investing if they're working with someone like yourself, but in that modeling for that design, because it's going to pay itself over multiple times and end up in a better result. You guys do a lot. I mean, obviously we're big fans. You guys wouldn't be part of High Performer if we didn't actually think the product was amazing. But are the other insulation companies providing all of the service that you guys are doing with all the modelling and that?
I don't think any offer of the modelling, and I may be wrong.
Yeah,
I don't know exactly. Definitely some of the others offer calculation method. No doubt about that. So I think like I'd say to anyone doing their own design, use the calculation method or use the modelling method, because you can save some serious money. But with the modelling method, you get to know how your house truly performs. And
yeah,
I say to a lot of our clients is, I guess, would you buy a vehicle without knowing how efficient it was? And the answer is no. And if you're buying
yeah,
a V8, you know what you're getting. But
yeah,
everyone buys a house and they don't really know how it performs. And you've got the likes of Homestar, the Green Building Council, Passive House. They do it right, and they do it well. But for the normal run of the mill houses, there isn't a cheap, easy way for them to find that out.
yeah,
And if more people are modelling and possibly doing it for free as a service or whatever, that they truly find out how that house performs, and you can educate clients so much better by knowing how that house truly performs, on where they should spend their money, if they should spend their money, and it's educated rather than, I've even got one builder, for example, that says they do high performing houses. Well, they do because they go above and beyond, but they don't know how well it truly performs because they're not modeling it. And I explained that to them. I said, well, what are you saying to your clients? You do a better home because you're going higher in your windows, higher in your insulation, all of it, than building code is, but you still don't have a number you can give them, right? So it gives you that tangible number that I think helps inform design. And like we talked about before, you can see your solar gains in summer, your solar losses in winter. You start tinkering with a lot more things when you're energy modeling. But I understand there's a cost, and I just hope more tools become available that are easy to use for people, don't have to always involve consultants, and that I guess the run of the mill
yeah.
builder, QS, whoever can use.
Yeah, but I look at it and I go, well, it's easy if you just come and work with you guys. And I don't know, yeah, it just seems like a no-brainer. But obviously, I'm already a convert, so but I commend you guys for doing that and offering that, because I suspect it costs you a lot. Because time is time. You can't discount that any further. But yeah, it's bloody good. Is there anything else in this document that we haven't talked about? And is there anything that you think should have gone further or should also be in there that is not?
Yeah, definitely. There's I guess there's quite a few other things in this document. Obviously, some of them are outside our warehouse, some of them are inside. One of the things I've noticed is, for a long time, it feels like MBIE have wanted to introduce framing ratios into walls, as part of H1, which totally makes sense in our opinion. When we're modeling with the Echo tool, we have to use 30% framing as a default, because for many years now, since the Beacon Pathway study was done, and I think in 2017 it was, and a lot of people reference this, and rightfully so, is that they found the average framing in New Zealand houses was 34%. We're all using 600 stud 800 nog, or 400 stud 800 nog, whatever it's going to be, and having 14 or 18% framing ratios, which isn't realistic. By the time he goes around windows, corners, jack studs, lintels, all of that. So I assume there would be a push into that space to raise that up. They've talked about it for a number of years, and it's looking like in this consultation document, I think it's Placemakers, don't quote me on that, but it looks like their framing trusts have done percentages, and I've seen them on a webinar before giving out percentages, and I think they did the study for them, or they gave the information on 450-ish houses and found it was 38% average, and that was large buildings and residential. So it's definitely up in that vicinity, right?
Have you ever punched in a house based on 30, got your number, and then just tweaked that to 38 and seen what happens?
Yeah, I mean, as soon as I saw this document, I put in 38% to see what they would do, right? And with this consultation document, they're talking about reducing in H1A is one that the housing standard is reducing the required R value down from 2.0, which it is currently, construction R value, not product value R value, remember. They're talking about reducing that down to 1.6, right? And the reason is, if they throw out that you have to use 38% framing when working out your construction R values in those walls, is that if you put in you know, a 2.2 or a 2.4, you won't get to, or even a 2.8, you won't get to 2.0 construction RV at 38%
Wow.
framing. So they have to bring that number down, which is what they're proposing. They're proposing it, bringing that down to 1.6 and having 38% framing. So that's your two benchmarks.
More
I
accurately
guess.
reflecting what you're going to have anyway,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, that's the reality is we all go around high-fiving because we're getting 2.0 construction RV out of our walls, but none of us are because we've got 34 or 38% framing in those walls, you know. So unless you can prove otherwise, which I've seen the odd architect or designer who is actually
Does the
producing a grant.
modeling method incorporate framing ratio?
So the one that we use, which is the Echo tool from the New Zealand Green Building Council, that has a default of 30%, which is much higher than what everyone's using for calculation method. I can't speak to other modeling methods, but if you want to be accurate in any model, it's the input, right? So most people should be putting in a higher framing ratio of what it either truly is or something up in those 30s, you know, since we've known those averages from
I mean, I suppose one
years
of the
ago.
difficulties, right, is, you know, by the time the frame and trust, I suppose that's happening in your consenting documents, isn't it? The frame and trust part is doing the
No, so,
test
so
for
the,
engineered frames.
well, well, that's what they were saying. Is a lot of times when we're doing H1, that's obviously prior to building consent,
Yeah.
and so we're choosing those, you know, stud and nog setups, like a 600, 800, for example. But then the frame and truss plan will come along, and they're looking at obviously what has to work with cladding,
Yeah.
structure, etc., and they're actually changing that. You know what I mean? And so it will blow the H1s, I guess, out of the water. You know, which is why they're saying bring in a 38% framing right at that outset, unless you can prove otherwise, you know. So I mean, to me, that totally makes sense. The risk is if they had gone, hey, you have to have 38% framing when you're doing your H1 calculations now, or showing H1 compliance, I should say. But you still have to achieve 2.0, then no 90 mil product would be able to achieve that. Or who knows, maybe some PIR or something like that, it might be able to. I haven't looked at that. But in bulk insulation, no one would achieve that at a 38% framing ratio, as far as I know. So we would have had to go to 140 framing at that point, you know, but they're looking at they obviously recognize and understand that, and they're a lot smarter than I am, and they've reduced that R value, or they're looking to reduce that down.
Yeah, I remember some of the earlier renditions of the previous changes were basically triggering a big move to 140 and then recognizing the practical implications of that as well as the cost. The cost benefit wasn't there, right? So if we're talking about moving to, say, you know, using 38% framing and 90 mil framing, lowering wall construction value to 1.6, you're saying from your experience, that's not the end of the world because it's still more efficient to get the gains in other areas than blow the wall out.
Well, effectively, it's doing the same thing, right? It is saying use the clear wall like it currently is of you know, whatever your main framing studs and logs are, and do it to R2.0 construction RV is effectively the same as going do it to 38% but use 1.6 construction RV, right? As it's roughly going to be the same within KUI. But what I think that gives us is it gives us a lot more accurate picture of what's going on in those walls, you know, what's going on, I should say. So yes, we're only getting 1.6 out of those walls, but that's truly what we're getting, and that's what we're getting now anyway, without really knowing it, you know. So whether the goal for them is to then bring that R value up after that, because they've then set the 38% point, and then they want to bring that up, I mean, that's what I would assume, only because the original 2021 consultation document that went out to market before all these changes took effect, they had benchmarked New Zealand against cities around the world. So cities in New Zealand against cities around the world. And their whole option 1, 2, 3 in that scenario was option 1 was going slightly above our building code today. Option 2 was going to what they classed as international standards. And option 3 was going above international standards. Myself and a lot of others in the industry thought we were aiming for option 2, which is international standards. But like you mentioned, a whole lot of things came into play that meant we didn't get there, right? And if you go back and look at that document, option 2 started at, I think, again, don't quote me because I'm trying to remember numbers from a couple of years ago, but it started at something like 2.4 construction R value, and it went up into the 3s as it went across the 6 climate zones in New Zealand. So we're not even close to that, you know. And if they wanted to get it there, it's going to have to be 140 framing. So I don't know if their goal is to get that framing percentage right to start with, bring it down to 1.6, and then increase it, But either way, it's going to mean we're going to go into the 140 framing at some stage. Maybe it's not, maybe they're going, no, 140 frames is just far too expensive, or we don't want to go there. But if you look back at that document, that was definitely where we were heading at that time, and I guess there's a lot of water that's gone under the bridge since then. So who knows if that's still the goal.
I mean, I think one of the keys is seeing a framework that allows industry to work with the client and come up with the best solution for the job as well, right? So being less prescriptive, and it allows for innovation. It allows for, because I'm thinking, even I know there's builders that we work with who have removed nogs from what they're doing, but they're going to need a tool to be able to get the offset for that,
Yeah.
And it might not be that they lower the R value of the insulation in their wall, but it might mean they get away with something lower somewhere else, or they actually go, no, we just want the better performance.
Yeah, that's right. What will happen is those people that are doing no nogs, etc., and have always known the implications of thermal bridging through those 90mm frames, they will obviously look to partner with a company that can give them that framing ratio. And then if that framing ratio happens to be, once they measure that whole house and it happens to be 26%, you can use that number because you've got a document from someone saying this house wall framing is 26%, right? And so their walls will be performing better than the default of a 38%. So hopefully more people start doing that, and it does put more implication on people will start to be aware of more of thermal bridging, and especially in those walls, and taking probably more timber out possibly, because at the moment builders are just gung ho and throw more timber in anywhere they can, and all the ones I talk to don't realise the implication of adding in nogs for hanging pictures or hanging this or whatever, like they don't realise that, hey, you've just taken a piece of insulation out of there, or that would have been there, that was 2.2, 2.4, 6, 8, whatever it was going to be, and you've put a 0.7 piece of timber in that space instead, But also, I totally respect I'm there with an insulation hat on, and they're probably thinking, who's this guy, mate? I'm just trying to build this house, But at the end of the day, it does have overall implications. Another couple of sticking points, like you mentioned before, is that there's definitely some that haven't been addressed. Like there's a whole lot that have been addressed. Another one that has been addressed is in those large buildings, the calculation method never had the flexibility to reduce ceilings and walls and windows. Ceilings, floors, and windows, I don't think. So what would happen is you could only tweak, I think, one area or two areas and the whole point of the calculation method is that flexibility, right? To lower down one area, raise up another based on cost.
Yeah.
It didn't have that, right? And they've acknowledged that in this, and that's one of the proposals is changing the calculation method to allow flexibility. So that's awesome as well. Pretty much all of the things I see here are great. The things that I feel have been missed, and I feel possibly it's because there's not an advocate or a governing body that address it, but alterations and additions. Since these new standards came in, additions have been so hard for us to get to comply, and we often see it, for example, in bungalows, right? So someone will be extending their bungalow out the back or making their lounge bigger.
Yeah.
They'll be adding that on, and it'll have a decent amount of glazing in it, and you have to hit today's standards, right, for just that addition. Now, if it's got over 30% glazing in just that addition, you're having to put huge amounts of insulation in there. And under the previous standard, NZS 4218, you could actually loop in the existing building and deem it to be up to today's standards. So what that meant is if the existing building had like 18% glazing in it, that would help you bring down the requirements of what was needed in that extension.
Right.
So, which they took away in H1AS1, and there's no wording to it. It almost doesn't reference existing buildings and what to do there. And so there's this right now, tons of people doing additions and having to put massive numbers in their glazing, roof, floor, walls, and the rest of their house is uninsulated or has minimal insulation in it, right? And to me, I go, I'm all for insulating and doing things better. But when your existing house has nothing in it, is that perceived energy saving really there? And there's no right way to do it. The whole house really would need to be done. But under the old way, where you could loop in the existing part of the building and put it in a reference to today's reference, it gave a better picture of the overall house. And I think they need to bring that back in, and allow that to be used again and actually cite it in H1AS1, because that's a real sticking point in the market right now, and finding it really hard, and especially if you're extending and you've got a slab. It's normally a very small slab with a small area to perimeter ratio. You imagine adding on a little bit to your house with a concrete slab, and you're having to put slab edge under slab, and the existing house has none of that stuff, all the costs, which you're not getting the perceived gains, So,
Yeah.
so I feel that's a real sticking point, for sure, and has sort of been overlooked, and it's been overlooked in this one too. So I'd love to see that addressed. The other thing is roof R values, right? We've always had an issue, and this goes back to the previous standard and the new standards, but more so in the new standards, is in New Zealand, we typically don't have a heel in our truss, right? And more people have been putting a raised heel and things like that with the new standards to accommodate thicker insulation where they can. But what happened is the insulation industry, I feel, slowly changed a little bit. And what we've been doing is, whether it's a double layer or a single layer, we've been putting roof guards on, or some people even putting mesh on or ply on the bottom side of their top quarter of their truss to keep a 25mm gap from the underside of their roofing to any insulation, which is the requirement under the building code. And they're squashing the insulation in out to the perimeter, or they're stripping layers out of it out to the perimeter. Now, what's happening is a lot of people are averaging the R value out in that perimeter. So currently, the minimum is 3.3 if you're doing the schedule method out in the perimeter. Right. So what they're doing is they're averaging across that 500mm. So in the schedule method, you're allowed 500.
They've got a wedge.
Yep.
And they're taking an average of that thickness.
Yeah, of that 500 in, right? So at the end, it might be 98mm, 95mm, 100mm, whatever. So they're stripping layers out of the insulation or putting a guard in and squashing it in. They're working that out, what it is in that perimeter, and then they're working it out by maths formulas, coming back out to the 500mm when it's at full height, right? And so that will give you an average. And it seems to be accepted by BCAs, and most people are using it. And some people are even averaging the whole roof as well, including that tapered down pitched area. So what will happen is you might have a double layer or a single layer that's, could be 400mm, could be 300mm, whatever it's going to be. And as it comes out to the perimeter and starts tapering down to that 98mm or 105mm, whatever it's going to be, you average that whole roof area, and that gives you a whole overall average roof RV. Now, there's no mention of both of those being accepted, although a lot of people in the industry are doing it and it's being accepted. So I would love to see some clarification on, they've mentioned in here, they're talking about reducing the minimum R value you can use to 2.6 in a roof, right? So which will mean out in the perimeter, you could go, and that's construction R value again, not product R value. So you would be able to go down to a 2.6, but there's no mention if you're allowed to average that, or if that's a hard minimum where you can not go no matter what below 2.6. Right. Because a lot of the industry currently, well, we know that 3.3 is the minimum, but is that the minimum of an average, or is that the minimum of a single piece in that roof that cannot be below 3.3? And at the moment, that's not. A lot of people are averaging. Most people I see are averaging, and I'd love some clarification on that to go, can we average those whole roofs? Yes or no? Can we average the perimeter? I guess if the schedule method's being discarded, like it looks like, then that 500mm won't apply anyway. So if you get rid of that part and you go, can we average the whole roof? Because effectively that's what a construction R value is anyway, is you're looking at the lining, you're looking at the framing, the insulation, how much coverage in a roof, which in a standard truss roof at 900 centers, there's 5% framing, 95% insulation, right? But that's working out a construction R value average of that whole roof. So what's the difference between averaging out your tapered down areas and factoring that into that whole calculation? So that for me is a bit of a sticking point, and not super clear, that I'd love to see addressed in this document or future documents. Can we use average RVs for those roofs? This isn't something new either, though, to me, is that a lot of people say to me, well, hang on, you guys are stripping layers off your insulation as it comes out to the perimeter. Or, hey, you're putting a board in and squashing it down. Well, under the previous standard, when the code used to be 2.9 in the ceiling for climate zones 1 and 2, that's what was happening anyway. A lot of people were putting a 3.2 product that was 180mm or 200mm, whatever it was, down into a 90mm heel. You still have to keep the 25mm gap then, you know what I mean? So it's just, there's more emphasis now because the layers are even bigger.
Yeah, it looks bigger.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask, because you keep talking about the heights, and I know this is I have a bit of a pet peeve around it, understanding what I understand about insulation, and also thinking around, like at a high performer, we want to be really focused on, what we're promoting is focused on the benefit for the end user, not for you as a supplier of the product, not for the builder, not for the architect, but making sure that as an industry, we are spitting out a product that actually bloody works and that they're getting what they paid for. And so we keep talking about this height. So question one, when we're squashing insulation, does it affect its performance?
Yes, it does. It
It
does.
doesn't
And
matter whether it's polyester or fiberglass, it's
if a product had a nominal loft of 200 and you're compressing it to 100 mil, you are definitely reducing its R value, right? Now,
yep.
there are generic formulas that, and I think it's, if you compress it 50%, you lose 50% of its R values. But then
Yes.
there's also some calculators that have worked out that the R value is slightly higher than that because the density goes up. So even if you're
Yep.
conservative and some people do it the conservative way and will just go off a formula, I've compressed it 20%, I've lost 20% of my R value or whatever it might be. And brands do or did have a formula for that. I'd have to dig it out. But some other installation companies have done their own testing. And I think even Design Navigator now has a tool where it works out what that R value is based on the compression area of it as well. So yes, you definitely use R value as the answer, but there are numbers that work that out.
So my next question then, if that appears, from me, it appears to be quite a critical factor, then surely in the inspection regime, there should be some testing and checking that the height and thickness of the insulations is what it was designed to be, to check that. I mean, like any other product, you have something that's designed and then we check that it was installed as per the design. But that doesn't seem to happen with insulation. We jam it in and squash it and do all of the shit. And it's like, there's no checking to go, actually, no, that was designed to perform like this at this thickness or this height. And it doesn't seem like it'd be that bloody hard for an inspector to do.
No, it was interesting. One of the head inspectors, and not going to name any or say which region it was, but I actually asked him exactly that. So under the new standards, we're obviously getting a lot thicker insulation. The requirement in the roof is a lot more. You're getting single layers that spill over the bottom quarter of the truss, talking truss roofs here, and you've got double layers, which the first one runs between the bottom quarter of the truss, and the second one goes over the top the other way perpendicular, right? Both methods, the whole reason is to cover the bottom quarter of the truss, to stop thermal bridging and get higher R values. Now, I said to the head of inspectors, I said, do you guys get up in the manhole and check that either one of these, the single layers or the double layers, are covering the bottom quarter of the truss? And he goes, no, we just look from underneath. And I said, but you can't see what's going on from underneath, right? And he gave me an explanation that they do X amount of inspections per day. And if he added another 5 minutes on those, it would blow out this many hours. And the numbers were phenomenal, right? And
Yeah.
I totally get his point. But I also go, there's people paying for these single layer and double layer systems with higher values that probably aren't getting what they're paying for. The architects and designers think that it's done. The whole industry thinks it's done, and it's not being done, And in most cases, hopefully it is working right. But unless you get up in there and you have a look, you have no idea if it's gone over the top. And to that point, you don't even know if an installer's put in a double layer if you don't get up in that manhole, right? They could have put a single layer and just put a couple of bail labels up. So I was truly dumbfounded when I got back. No, we don't go up in the manhole and have a look. And also, they didn't even understand about spillover products and why we're trying to cover the bottom quarter of the truss. So I feel there's a real lack of, we come out with these rules. I guess architects and designers live and breathe it, right? So they understand it typically. Then builders hopefully understand it. Some of them probably don't with the double layers and the thermal bridging that you get through timber. A lot of them do, don't get me wrong, but some don't know how much. I get some builders tell me timber's an amazing insulator. Like, look at the log cabins in Canada. They don't have any insulation, but you're talking these massive logs. You're not talking, sticks of timber. So sometimes they don't get it. But then the council inspectors, they're the ones, they're really effectively the jurisdiction that should be making sure that it's done.
Yeah, well, and I think
right.
what's frustration, the missing piece there is when you look at the code and the amount of effort that's going into this whole H1 piece is demonstrating that we know that thermal or energy performance of the building is a critical piece of the building's performance. Otherwise, we wouldn't be spending all this money trying to make sure it does it. So, I think it comes back to the like the risk. Do you know what I mean? Like if it's a structural element and it fails, we've got catastrophe. If it's a thermal element and it fails, then they're kind of going, oh, well, it's not that bad. But I think this is just highlighting. It's not just the industry right through to the consenting authorities. It feels like we're not putting the customer first, and it's almost like you need the Commerce Commission to come and have a look at the building industry and go, hey, are these products you guys are delivering actually giving the customer what you told them that you would give them? Because any other industry would get ripped to shreds.
Yeah, I mean, it's a classic case of theoretical versus real life, right?
Yeah.
And you can say that even when you model a house with best intentions, how's it actually installed? A lot of times the modeler will not see how that's installed. But there's no checks and balances to go. Like when you're doing a passive house and probably a high Homestar house, there are checks and balances as that goes through. But a general house, it's done with best intentions, and then what's actually being done. But you would just hope that council, I feel the link between educating council is not there to go, hey guys, yes, the RBAs have changed. These are the reasons why, and these are what's going to have to change in your guys' checklist to make sure that all of this has been done right, because that sort of blew me away that council did not understand. And the explanation I gave was, if you put a 7.0 product in between the bottom quarter of your trusses and it doesn't spill over, so how traditional products used to be, I cannot remember the exact RV, but it's well below 7, right? Because you've still got those 90mm bottom chords of the truss that are effectively thermal bridging, and there's 0.7 of our RVA roughly. So yeah, you've got this great 7 insulation in between your framing, and then you've got all these points that are just 0.7 all around.
Yeah.
Now, when you do a spillover product, that's going to spill over, or a double layer, right? And absolutely reduce those levels. So if you put a 7.0 spillover product and it does spill over, you're roughly going to get a 7 or a 7.2 or something like that, similar to what you put in. So the difference is quite large. Well, it's massive. It's between spilling over and not spilling over. So for an council inspector to get up here and not look at, I guess, whether it's spilling over or not, it seems quite ludicrous to me. And same with a double layer, because if it's not, then effectively you've got a much lower R value and it would fail. Both its possible model, its H1, and should fail in inspection too, But I feel there's an education piece missing in that.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what I'm keen to know now is sort of a couple of action points, like where to from here. What are some key things that you want people to know? And any action points? And do you think would it be helpful? Do we think people need to send in feedback to this consultation document? And if so, what would you be encouraging them to include in that?
Yeah, so I would hope that everyone that's going to make a submission or wants to make a submission is supportive of all these things. I think all of them are good things. The wall percentage thing's possibly going to make it a little harder in the future, but it's accurate. There's a lot of good things in here. So hopefully everyone submits, positive feedback to all the proposed changes. But I really hope that people go a bit further with that are having trouble like us, with the likes of, I mentioned additions, for example. I really hope that because I feel there's no governing body like a certified builders or master builders probably that focus on that. Maybe there is, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel there needs to be more emphasis on, hey, additions. Can we loop in existing as reference like we used to be able to with NZS 4218? Can you write that in to H1AS1 to make that happen? They're talking about adding more slab options to their tables in H1AS1 and more window options, which is good because I feel there need to be a few more options. One thing we see that I'd love other people to recommend as well is the most common slab that we see is a raft slab, and people putting under slab under that raft slab. That isn't in the tables in H1AS1. From memory, I'd love that to get added in to H1AS1. I would like people to push for those average R values in the roof. You know, hey, can we use our average R values? At the moment, most people are. It seems to be accepted, but can we have something in here stating that average R values for the whole roof is accepted? You know, because that would make it a lot easier. Installers, from what I see in the market, hate having to take a second product out to do around the perimeter. You know, they would much rather take one product out, feather it down, or put the roof guard on and compress it down in that perimeter. And providing that's worked out properly, why can't we use average R values and truss roofs? You know, so I would personally like to see that pushed by a lot of people, and I doubt anyone would be against that. One thing, you know, another thing for me is we have 6 climate zones. Climate zones 1 to 4 are exactly the same. And windows, slabs, walls, and roofs. Why do we have 6 climate zones with the exact same in all of them? You know, exact same in 4 of them. If you're using a slab in 4, timber sub 4 changes the fraction. But you know, there was hope. A lot of people were hoping that they would reduce the R value requirement and possibly climate zones 1 or 2 down a little bit in the ceiling, because that seems high, you know. But I tend to agree and go, yeah, it was cool coming up with 6 climate zones, but in residential, the first 4 climate zones are the same with a concrete slab. So, you know, maybe a bit more feedback on, well, yeah, you know, and maybe they've decided they're there already, so they want to leave it. I'm not too sure on that front. Large buildings is another one I'd like more emphasis on. The slabs are significantly higher in large buildings, like I mentioned earlier. I'd love to see that reduced. I don't see how residential can have way lower, or housing, I should say, much lower requirements for a slab than commercial buildings. And the idea of the area to perimeter ratio is better is right, yes, but it doesn't offset that much. And putting false floors on top of concrete slabs, you're doing it twice. Likewise with the walls as well. The walls have gone up much higher than what residential is. I'd love to see that come back a little bit too. You know, if people are pushing for that, those are the key things really from my point of view.
The other thing on the slab, and I know that's not your guys' main thing, but my understanding is you're going to get better increased performance with edge protection than under slab, because most of the heat out of the slab is out the edge. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, that seems to be a bit of a back and forward, to be honest, because you know, originally when these standards came out, that seemed to be the general consensus. Although some people seem to be saying now, nah, under slab's actually the better option, and I feel that might be because industry's pushed that way and gone that hard against slab edge. You know, so I noticed people dropping out slab edge requirements. I think I may be wrong, but I think Homestar even dropped the requirement for that. But it just seems very hard to do or costly to do, or there's that reluctance is definitely there, and it seems that people are possibly saying that it's maybe not as important as it was deemed a couple of years ago. I mean, it has to be important.
I'd like to get to the bottom of that. It might be worth doing something with Quickset, because I would hate to see the industry adopt something that again was good for industry just because it was too hard for us, as opposed to that's actually the better outcome, you know.
Well, definitely having slab edge on is going to be far better than not, right?
Yes.
But the reluctance in the industry is huge in that space.
I just want to know, is that based on cost benefit and hard data, or is it just getting, like a lot of things in our industry, thrown in the too hard basket? And maybe, and there is a case for, you know, we know Quickset does it in a cost-effective, easy way, but sometimes you do need industry to catch up so that there's options and there's ways to get there, and you know, that I get that.
I mean, as a layman, I just look and go, you're slapping some insulation on the side of a slab. How hard can that be? You know, but clearly it's not. And you've got more details coming down to meet it and things like that.
Oh, well, mate, thank you for your time. Clearly, you can tell you guys are A, really passionate, B, know your stuff, and C, are prepared to kind of go above and beyond and actually deliver a brilliant service alongside what I know is an awesome product. So, yeah, thank you for your time, mate, and well done to you guys, and let us know if there's anything else we can do to support. I think I'm going to be catching up and trying to do a building pulse with Minister Pink in the new year. And maybe that's an opportunity to raise a couple of those things at that point. So feel free to flip me through a few key questions for that as well.
I definitely will. Thanks very much, Tim, for having me on.
All right, mate. Good stuff.
Cheers.
Have a Merry Christmas.
You too. Bye-bye.